Music, ambient low, the silence that followed the Great Fire of London was deafening. You have to understand, this was not just any ordinary fire, it had reduced an entire city block to smouldering ruins. The people who had fled in terror now returned to survey the damage, their faces etched with shock and grief. The streets were choked with debris, the charred remains of buildings a stark reminder of what had been lost. The stench of smoke and ash hung heavy over the city, making it hard to breathe. You can almost smell it now, can't you? That acrid tang that clings to your clothes and hair. But amidst the devastation, there was a sense of chaos. Looters were already at work, rummaging through what remained of people's homes in search of valuables. The lawlessness that followed the fire would become a major concern for those trying to rebuild. The exact number of lives lost will never be known, but estimates range from 70 to over 1,000. You have to wonder how many families were torn apart in that one night. What happened to them after they fled their burning homes? As the flames were finally extinguished, the true extent of the destruction became clear. The fire had consumed everything in its path, leaving behind only rubble and ash. But amidst the ruins, there was something else, a small, charred piece of paper, partially buried beneath the debris. What could it be? A letter? A receipt? A piece of art? We'll never know for sure, but what we do know is that this tiny fragment would become a crucial clue in unraveling the mystery of how the Great Fire started. And as you watch this story unfold, keep your eyes peeled for more clues. You have to understand that London was a city on the brink, even before the flames took hold. Its wooden buildings and narrow streets created a ticking time bomb of potential disaster. The city's rapid growth had outpaced its development, leaving behind a patchwork of half-built houses and makeshift shops. People were living and working in close quarters, with barely any regard for safety or sanitation. The smell of wood smoke hung over the city like a pall, but no one thought much of it, it was just another day in London. The River Thames, once a lifeblood, had become a dumping ground for waste and debris. As you walk through the streets today, it's hard to imagine the chaos that lurked beneath the surface. But the records tell a different story. There were warnings about the dangers of wood construction, but they fell on deaf ears. The city's authorities were more concerned with lining their pockets than protecting its citizens. London was a city built for speed and profit, not for safety or sustainability. And as we'll see, it was this very mindset that would ultimately lead to the catastrophe of 1666. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's take a closer look at the clues that would eventually uncover the truth about the Great Fire's origins. This small piece of paper, for instance, what could it be telling us? A snippet from a letter, perhaps, or a receipt from a long-forgotten transaction. The answer lies just out of reach, but one thing is certain, this tiny fragment would become the key to unraveling the mystery of the Great Fire. The city was ablaze with discontent. Tension simmered just below the surface as Londoners seethed against their rulers. You have to understand, this wasn't just about politics, it was about survival. For decades, London had been bursting at the seams. Its narrow streets and wooden buildings seemed quaint now, but they were a recipe for disaster waiting to happen. The city's growth had outpaced its ability to keep pace, leaving residents feeling trapped in a nightmare of their own making. But who was really to blame? Was it the Lord Mayor, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, who had grown increasingly autocratic and detached from his people? Or perhaps it was the parliamentarians, still seething from the aftermath of the English Civil War. The fire would eventually reduce much of this discord to ashes, but for now, it was simmering just beneath the surface. Factions formed and reformed, each one whispering its own brand of rebellion in the ears of their followers. A group known as the Levellers, passionate advocates for democratic reform, were gaining traction among the common folk. Meanwhile, the more radical elements within the parliamentarian camp were stirring up trouble on the fringes. And then there were the ordinary Londoners, merchants, artisans, and traders, who had grown tired of being squeezed by the ever-tightening grip of taxes. But what about those who stood to gain from this chaos? Were there unseen hands at play, orchestrating events from behind the scenes? A small piece of paper, worn and faded, might hold the key. A snippet from a letter, perhaps, or a receipt from a long-forgotten transaction, but what if it was something more? You have to understand, this tiny fragment would become the linchpin in unraveling the mystery of the Great Fire. The night of September 2nd, 1666, was one that would change the course of history forever. You have to understand, the city of London had been simmering with discontent for months, merchants and artisans weary of the heavy taxes imposed by the crown. The streets were filled with whispers of rebellion, of revolution. But what about those who stood to gain from this chaos? Were there unseen hands at play, orchestrating events from behind the scenes? It's a question that would haunt historians for centuries to come. And yet, on this particular night, no one suspected a thing. The moon was full overhead, casting an eerie glow over the city's rooftops. A gentle breeze rustled through the alleys, carrying the sweet scent of wood smoke and baking bread. But then, without warning, it happened. A faint spark, no larger than a candle flame, flared to life in a small bakery on Pudding Lane. It was a moment that would be seared into the memories of those who witnessed it, a moment of sudden, explosive chaos. You have to understand, this was not just any ordinary fire. This was a blaze that seemed almost calculated in its ferocity. The flames leapt and danced with an unnatural intelligence, as if fueled by some unseen force. And yet, as the people of London watched in horror, it became clear that this was no isolated incident. This was the beginning of something much, much bigger. A catastrophe that would reduce their beloved city to ashes. But what if I told you, that's not what the records actually show? You have to understand, this was not just any ordinary fire. This was a blaze that seemed almost calculated in its ferocity. The flames leapt and danced with an unnatural intelligence, as if fueled by some unseen force. But what the accounts often gloss over is the sheer speed at which it spread. You see, the city's narrow streets, once thought to be a blessing, now became a conduit for the fire's relentless march. It was like a dark tide, sweeping through the alleys and marketplaces, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. The screams of the panicked crowd still echo through our collective memory. They tried to flee, but the flames seemed to anticipate their every move. The streets were choked with people, desperate to escape, yet unable to move forward or backward. This was the moment when the city's very fabric began to unravel. The sense of security that had once defined London's residents gave way to an all-consuming terror. They had never experienced anything like it before. You can almost hear their collective heartbeats pounding in their chests. But I want you to imagine something else, too. Imagine the faces etched with fear and confusion as they realized that the fire was not just a random event, but rather a symptom of a far larger problem. The city's very infrastructure, its wooden buildings, narrow alleys, and inadequate firefighting systems had created an environment ripe for disaster. The records tell us that many tried to fight back against the inferno, using whatever they could find, buckets, blankets, even their own bodies. But it was a losing battle from the start. The fire seemed to be feeding off them, growing stronger with each passing moment. You have to understand that amidst the chaos and destruction, there emerged a figure who would play a crucial role in shaping the fate of this city, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, the Lord Mayor of London. Now, at first glance, one might think him a hero. After all, he did take charge of the city's response to the fire. But as we delve deeper into the records, it becomes clear that his leadership was problematic. The accounts tell us that Bloodworth arrived on the scene only to survey the destruction, seemingly unfazed by the catastrophe unfolding before him. A few houses to be pulled down, he reportedly said of the fire's spread, as if it were a trivial matter. You can almost hear the incredulity in his own voice. It's hard not to wonder what drove this man to such a callous response. But Bloodworth was no ordinary leader. He was a product of his time, a product of the very system that had allowed London's infrastructure to decay. He represented a tradition of governance that prioritized property and privilege over people. And in this moment, as the flames raged on, it seemed that tradition would prevail. The city's guilds, ever powerful and ever corporate-minded, were instrumental in shaping Bloodworth's response, or lack thereof. Their interests, after all, lay with preserving their wealth and influence, not with saving lives. And so, as the fire ravaged on, they worked behind the scenes to secure their own property, while leaving the bulk of the city to burn. You can almost hear the whispers of despair echoing through those narrow alleys, the cries of women and children, the anguished prayers of the faithful. And yet, amidst this chaos, Bloodworth remained resolute in his refusal to act decisively. It's a stark reminder that even in the face of disaster, human nature can be just as destructive as the flames themselves. But what we often forget is that London's people were not so easily defeated. They fought back against the fire with whatever they had: courage, determination, and a deep-seated resilience. And it was this spark, however small, that would eventually fan into a flame of hope, one that would propel them forward, even in the darkest of times. You have to understand that for centuries, we've been taught one version of events surrounding the Great Fire of London. We've been led to believe it was an accident, a tragic concatenation of human error and circumstance. But what if I told you that's not the whole story? That there were those who knew more, who had secrets they kept hidden from prying eyes. Look closely at the accounts of the time. There are hints, whispers really, of something more sinister at play. A deliberate act, a calculated risk taken by those in power to reshape the very fabric of the city. You've seen the images of London's inferno, the burning churches, the fleeing crowds, the screams of terror and despair. But what if I told you that amidst all this chaos, there were those who saw opportunity? Who saw the fire not as a disaster, but as a chance to remake the city in their image? Bloodworth's actions, or lack thereof, have been scrutinized by historians for years. We've asked ourselves why he failed to act decisively when it mattered most. But what if I told you that his reluctance was not mere incompetence? That there were those who stood to gain from the fire, who had a vested interest in seeing London burn? We're getting close now to the heart of the matter. The questions we've been asking ourselves: who started the fire? Why did it spread so quickly? Begin to seem less relevant than another question altogether: what was the true purpose behind this catastrophe? Was it simply a case of arson, or something more? The city lay in ruins, its people left to pick up the pieces. But amidst the destruction, a spark remained. A flame of hope that would eventually guide them through the darkest of times. We're getting close now to the heart of the matter. The questions we've been asking ourselves: who started the fire? Why did it spread so quickly? Begin to seem less relevant than another question altogether: what was the true purpose behind this catastrophe? Was it simply a case of arson, or something more? The city lay in ruins, its people left to pick up the pieces. But amidst the destruction, a spark remained. A flame of hope that would eventually guide them through the darkest of times. As you walk through the charred streets, you can almost feel the weight of despair lifting off the shoulders of London's survivors. The cries of the bereaved, the wails of the injured, all slowly giving way to whispers of a new beginning. The king himself had declared that the city would rise again from its ashes, and it seemed almost impossible at first. But as the days turned into weeks, something remarkable began to happen. Londoners who'd lost everything started rebuilding with their own two hands. You have to understand, this was no haphazard process. It was a deliberate choice, born from the lessons learned in that darkest of hours. The city's leaders worked tirelessly with its people to create a new plan, one that would safeguard against such devastation ever happening again. As you gaze out upon the rebuilding efforts, you'll notice something peculiar. It's not just about restoring what once was, but creating something entirely new. A new grid system, wider streets, and sturdier buildings, all designed with safety in mind. And then there's the question of who exactly started this fire. We know now that one Thomas Fariner had been hired to get rid of the wooden houses on Pudding Lane. But what drove him to set those fuses? Was it greed, or something more sinister? The answer lies in a simple yet profound truth: from ashes comes rebirth. And London's rebirth was not just about rebuilding its physical foundations, but also healing its collective wounds. London rose from the flames like a phoenix, scarred but stronger for it. And that's precisely why we must remember this great fire, not as an act of arson or destruction, but as a testament to the indomitable spirit of a city and its people.